So hello everyone and welcome to Frames. This is the first Frames in a while, and I've chosen to do this for a special reason, because we are joined today by the eco champion of All Saints Church, Bedworth Parish, and that is Chris Rigden. Chris, how are you?
I'm well today, thank you very much.
Great. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the environment, about climate change, about how that intersects with our faith and how we can make a difference. We might cover a gamut of topics within that, but obviously there's a lot in the news in general in recent years, at the moment with the floods in Pakistan and fires in Greece and Turkey, and there's a lot of, it seems to have kind of brought the discussion back to the fore again. Not that it has ever left the lips of the public consciousness in recent years. But first off, Chris, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, about your upbringing, things like that?
And how did I get here anyway?
That's it.
Yeah, I grew up in Connecticut, in the New England part of the United States. I was the middle of 5 children, so reasonably big family. My dad was an engineer for Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, but with 5 children and 1 salary, we weren't, really well off. And I was into art, and I did all the art courses I could at school. And my mother, as a hobby, my parents had overseas visitors as a thing. So I remember people from Vietnam and India and Sri Lanka and France and England and other foreign places like that.
Yeah.
And it meant we grew up with a sense that, we're all human together. There's not any real difference between the different countries, just a little bit of how they speak or some of their cultural differences. So that's the kind of patchwork, people were, although it was a house full of introverts, all my family have a preference for introversion. So there's not a lot happening. It was a very quiet household, which you don't expect with 5 kids. So outside visitors were always really welcome. Company's coming was the excited cry when we were having, she'd host students from the local university who would come over for Sunday lunch or something like that. Or she would take them to various places. But as a follow on from that, I visited England, returning the visit to a couple families who'd been with us in 1973. And I thought, this is where I want to go to college. So in 1974, I came here to go to art college and stayed.
Whereabouts in England were you at art college?
I went to North Staff's Polytechnic in Stoke-on-Trent.
Okay.
I lived in Hanley, and the course was in Burslem. So it was we were in. They had a block of the council flats set aside for students. So something of the experience of what a council flat is like. It well laid out. It was a good design, but no fridge, which was a bit of a shock from an American background where all mod cons have been standard for a bit longer. And they're definitely the friendliest place I have ever lived.
Really?
Maybe because I was a, poor student. We went around barefoot with long dress and long hair. But, invited over for dinner and invited for cups of tea. And I went to the Assembly of God Church that was just a short walk straight up from the block of flats. And I'd found it. I managed to find it through the help of some local pastor.
Yeah.
There's this one on St. John Street, and it's not far from where you're going to be. You didn't have the internet then. You couldn't just look it up on Google.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a challenge, even applying.
Yeah.
So
around that time, did you?
I met Terry the previous visit, and then I got to know him better after we got here, and we got engaged. And then the following year, we got married.
Nice.
And the following year, we had a child, our son, Tim. But as we were both still students, I stopped because I was feeling too sick. But then we had no money because he had a discretionary grant, which was smaller than a full grant, and all that sort of. Anyway, we were on benefits, which was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
I learned how to budget.
Yeah, hard going.
You learn how to not spend money.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't have to buy clothes. You've already got what you stood up in.
That stood you in good stead for what we're going to talk about a bit later on.
Yeah, and secondhand baby stuff for Timothy, and everything worked fine for that. And that was, we're still married.
You made it through.
It's been, we all have our ups and downs, but I tell people it's the first 20 years that are the hardest.
Well,
it's 47 now, so it gets easier, you see.
Nice. That's a big comfort. Only got to wait 13 years. So in terms of quite a journey, a lot of eclectic experiences and some challenge, but some joys. What about your faith journey? How did you come to know Jesus?
I think my father might have been a Christian, but he wasn't very outspoken.
Yeah.
And he made a point of being superintendent of the local Sunday school at the Congregational church we went to. Mm-hmm. And I went along to Sunday school. I was the only one in the family who actually really wanted to go. The others put up with it until they were allowed to stop. Mm. And always this sense that Jesus was in history, and how I wish I could have known him.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think as the middle child of 5, you feel a bit left out of things sometimes. Mm. I was the only arty one in a quite technical family. Yeah. So what I had to say wasn't as interesting to them as if I was talking about physics or engineering. Yeah. So it was, I remember that there's a children's hymn. I wish that his hands had been placed on my head and his arms had been thrown around me. I don't know if you know the old hymn, but anyway.
Maybe, not sure.
That used to mean a lot to me as a child. But through a friend at school when I was 14, I encountered Jesus. And that suddenly made an incredible amount of difference to who I was and how I felt about myself and life. And when I was 15, I encountered the Holy Spirit, which again was another step change in all that was going on inside me. And worshipped with a Jesus People group. Mm-hmm. Back in the 70s, there were a few of those around where we didn't have a denominational dogma to tell us what to think. We read the Bible, and that's what informed our thinking.
Nice. Yeah. I see on your notes you've got Matthew 6:24. What does that have? Some sort of?
Yes. Before I became a Christian, before I made that commitment, I was going through a period of depression from the age of 12 and 13, and I often felt, I don't know why I'm here. No one will miss me if I'm not here anymore.
Wow.
And, actually thoughts of suicide, but not making much progress in that. Just, what's the point? Yeah. And I used to worry about nothing. Mm. I would just have this sort of anxiety level. And I became a Christian. This was round about Christmas time. And in the spring afterwards, I got to know a few of the others in school who went to this fellowship, the Jesus People group. And I remember I was reading my Bible one day, and this passage from Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, almost had a box round it. It sort of stood off the page in a way it's never happened since, but that was just amazing.
Yeah.
And it said, stop worrying. I'm looking after you now. Cool it. You know. And from then on, I really did definitely say, oh, what am I wound up about now? No, it's in God's hands. Stop it.
Nice.
Because you can persuade your mind, you know, you can tell your mind what to do.
Yeah.
You're not at the mercy of these emotions necessarily.
Mm.
So yeah, that happened when I was 14, and it made a difference.
So at what point would you say that you started to become maybe conscious of the environment, the need to protect the environment, climate change, these sort of issues? How?
Well, it kind of was raised occasionally at school. My older brother used to talk about zero population growth and things like that. Um, but it didn't really impinge on my own consciousness until I think my son was about 2. My main input was books. I was reading and reading and reading.
Yeah.
Someone loaned me the book called Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger. And all the pieces just kind of came together, that here we are calling ourselves Christians when we're supposed to love our neighbor, we're supposed to love those around us, you're supposed to care for the poor and all that. And we don't. We just spend our money and enjoy ourselves and go on our way. This wasn't particularly environmentally focused, but money focused, and how to give 10% of your income of what you actually need, and then 15% of the next slice and 20% of the next slice.
Yeah.
Anyway, it just really opened my eyes that as Christians, we're supposed to love other Christians and other people. We're very inward and self-focused, really. And that other things moved on from there. In the 80s, a friend introduced the idea of recycling to me. There you had to go to a bottle bank back then. You had to go to a paper bank to do your paper. They didn't collect it from the roadside. It was possible, but it was an effort. So we made the effort. We clean the bottles and we clean the tins and we find a place where we can take them. And as my son was getting older and then going to school, and e-numbers became visible in the press back then. That was when they started coming in, and discovering what some of them are and noticing that chemicals in our food and in our environment have a negative effect on all of us in various ways. So I've tried to reduce the amount of chemicals in my cleaning. My soap powder isn't going to cause algae when it gets to the rivers, and so on. In the 90s, I was starting to focus more on reducing energy use. Well, because all along we had just hit my husband's job, just Terry's job. I wasn't working. And I just made a point of budgeting well and cooking efficiently from scratch so that we didn't need 2 incomes. We made a point of having only 1 car. That was a choice very early on. But in the 90s, we began to hear more about climate being talked about. And so we started trying to focus a bit more on reducing our energy use, our mileage in the car, that sort of thing. I got a degree when I was 38. So as a mature student, I was cycling the 5 miles to the university. So I was interested in things technical then to some extent. But after I started working for BT, in 2006, there was a lot more. There was an Inconvenient Truth, the film came out somewhere around there, and lots of people talking about the environment and climate change and arguing both sides, and both sides sounding logical. I thought, how do I untangle this? What's true and what isn't? Because either it's true or it's not. So I did an open university course, a module on weather and climate, and it went through all the physics around how weather systems work, how global climate works. It had simulation software you could work out for yourself, and so on. So at the end, well, even a fraction into that course, you could see, this is obviously what's happening. This is what the data says. This is the implication. These are the implications of that data.
Yeah.
So that was just an eye-opener.
Yeah.
And so then we did things like solar panels, a wood-burning stove that we fueled with wood that was being harvested by the conservation group, because we lived next to a triple SI, and they have to burn everything anyway that they're taking away, because they're trying to preserve a particular kind of environment for a blue butterfly.
Yeah.
So they're going to burn it anyway. So it kept us warm, and our gas bills went down, and electricity bills and so on. So that was kind of the start of a real focus, was the early 2000s.
Yeah. So you've covered this to some extent, but what would you say is the relationship between your faith and your concern for the environment? Do you think someone can be a Christian and not have concern for the environment?
I can't necessarily say so-and-so is not a Christian if they say they are, because I can't see their heart. But by their fruits you will know them. And I think that the way we handle the climate issue is part of the fruit that A, other people will be looking at, and B, God will be looking for. How are you, as a child of God, caring for his creation? How are you, as a child of God, trying to lessen the impact of this on the poorest people in the planet? Because it's the poorest who are most impacted, and they had the least to do with it. It's our consumption patterns. Everything we buy has a carbon footprint. Everything we throw away has a carbon footprint. Everywhere we go, that if we're traveling by transport, has a carbon footprint, and very little carbon footprint for the people in the poorest countries. So yeah, it's about your fruit as a Christian. How are you living with love and compassion with the world?
And I see on your notes you said you quote the scripture, "Do not store treasures on earth."
Yes. Looking for relevant verses, and Jesus does say that in Matthew, that not to store up treasures on this earth where people can steal them and they just degrade anyway, but your treasure should be in heaven. Some Christians say that you can ignore climate change because God's going to burn it all up anyway in the end times. Yes, but that is no excuse for mistreating the poorest and most vulnerable in the world.
Yes.
It's our greed that's doing this, not our goodness.
He says, says love our neighbour, and it's not like our neighbour, everyone's gonna kind of die and leave this earth, Doesn't mean that in the meantime, we need to mistreat and neglect people. So why would we do the same with our earth, I guess, is it?
Yes, indeed. The creation he's given us to steward.
Sure. Yeah.